Hello, I'm Mrs H. You can find my patterns at www.mrs-h.com. In today's tutorial, we're going to be sewing the Tidy Tote. This is a great storage basket or bucket tote, if you like. This one's more of a rounded shape and this one is still sitting clipped. It's got more of a rectangular shape. I've used a contrast base on this one, but you can use the same colour as your exterior fabric. I've used the same webbing for both. You can make handles out of fabric there if you prefer. And inside we've got these mesh pockets with fold over elastic at the top. This is a great size. You'll love this tote. It will fit everything in. You can have one for your sewing supplies, one for your hair and beauty products, one for your administrative things, your notepads, your pens, your pencils, anything you like. It's got a nice sturdy base, although it is lightweight, so if you need to fold it, you can. And I'll show you in the video how to get these really nice, tight lining corners. You can see that the base is not saggy or baggy in there at all, so I'll show you how to do that. In the video, I'll also talk you through how to add mesh pockets to any other project and how to work out the measurements for that. So get your supplies together and we'll get started and we'll start sewing. Right, first thing you need to do is add your Decaville or your firm stabilizer onto the bottom of your base. So my faux leather that I'm using is a textured one and I'm not sure how well it responds to the heat. So what I've done is I've added my foam first and then added my Decaville on top as well, and that makes it quite nice and firm, gives it a nice sturdy bottom. Right, so you can pop that to one side and we'll need our exterior panels next. Or actually, I should probably mark the centres of this before we go much further, because I do always forget. And oh gosh, it's quite sturdy already. Let me see if I can bend it that way. Yeah, that's going to make a really nice sturdy bottom. That's good. I'm pleased with that. Before we even get sewing. Okay. I suppose it depends how heavy the things you're going to carry are as to how sturdy you want that to be. Okay, I'm also actually going to mark the centre of the ends as well. Just so we know later on when we come to box our corners, we'll know where the centre is. Make sure they're nicely aligned. Okay, right, so exterior panels. So I've added my foam onto these as well. As you can see, mine is a little bit creased, but only because I just didn't want to add any heat onto this, just in case. I might end up having a flat, completely flat faux leather, mightn't I? That wouldn't be very good. Right, okay, so we need our webbing, and you're going to cut your webbing into two lengths of 22 inches or 55 centimetres. I've already cut mine, and also I've heat sealed the ends. So because mine's a polyester webbing, I've just held it near to a flame, not on the flame, just near, and it's sealed the ends as well to stop them fraying. Now, draw yourself a little line, looking for a pen here, there we go, 1/4 of an inch from each end. So that's 6 mil, because we're going to overhang this webbing. I'm going to make sure that enough of it is in the seam allowance so that it doesn't fray and pull out of your top seam. That didn't work very well. Let's see if it works a bit better with some chalk. There we go, that's better. Okay, so I'm going to mark it on both ends of both pieces of webbing. And that will make it a little bit easier then for me to identify exactly where to have it hanging over. Okay. So that's 6 mil or 1/4 of an inch. All right. Now with your main panels, first things first, let's mark the centres. so we know that we're lining everything up completely straight and evenly. Let's have a look. I'm going to do this on top and bottom. My fabric's not really directional, but if yours is, then you can do that as well. Right, so the handles, we are going to attach them 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters from each center, and there'll be 5 inches between each handle. So let me add a pin into my center so that you can see a little bit easier on the camera. Right, so there's my center, and I want to add my webbing 2.5 inches from the center. Now, because we've marked that 1/4 inch line, you can just put that line on the edge of your fabric. Okay, so your webbing will be hanging over by 1/4 inch, but you know that that's completely straight because you've marked that line there 1/4 inch away. And then I'm going to do this one 2.5 inches from the center as well. And that should mean then that there's 5 inches between the inside of each handle. Now make sure they're not twisted. You can make longer handles on this if you want to carry it as a shoulder bag. You can add longer handles, of course. This is just a little grab carry handle really. Okay, so all we're going to do is baste those into place, and we're going to sew them 1/4 inch from the edge of the fabric. So line it up on your fabric rather than your webbing. It'd be 1/2 inch from the end of your webbing. Okay. Now, because I'm using faux leather and polyester webbing, I'm not going to go over and over and over when I'm basting. I'm just doing a back stitch at the start, one line of stitching and a back stitch at the end. Don't want to create too many holes. I don't want this to fray and come out later. Oh, hang on, that hasn't worked. I wonder if my bobbin has come unthreaded maybe. Yeah, oops. Let me rethread my bobbin through. That's obviously snapped. Best laid plans, eh? It's usually on the 3rd thing that I've sewn that something goes wrong. So seems about perfect timing really. Okay. Right, let's try that one again. Unfortunately, I've got this line here on my webbing, so I can line it up perfectly still. There we go, that's better. Okay, so I'm just going to do exactly the same on the second panel with the other piece of webbing. Take some of these extra threads out before they show up in the final construction. That would be annoying me, I think. There's always an extra thread, isn't there? And you can't work out where it's come from or how it's managed to pop up in the final construction. And it's always usually from one of these basting stitches where it's gotten caught in the seam, isn't it? Right, so I'm just marking my centres again. I'll do that on my top and bottom. Of course, if you follow the pattern, you will have done this earlier. And pop a pin in through my centre so that I can identify that. Okay, and for my second piece of webbing, here we go, and my ruler. So I'm going to put this again 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters from the center and make sure that it's overhanging by 1/4 inch by lining up that line we've just drawn. And add a pin. And then 2.5 inches the other side, which will give us 5 inches between the two. Okay, there we go. Now I've managed to put my pins in the opposite way to how I'm going to sew them, so I better change those around before I get into trouble. Catch my pins while I'm sewing. There we go. Right, so let's baste these into place then, exactly the same as we did before, on a long stitch length and 1/4 inch from the fabric, from the edge of the fabric, sorry. And the second one exactly the same. Perfect. Okay, great. Now this is probably the most satisfying bit because it's only a couple of steps and then you'll be able to see what your final bag is going to look like without too much extra delay. Okay, the next thing to do is to add our base onto our main panels. So what we're going to do, we're going to mark the center of the main panel so that we can see it. Marked it on the back, but I'm just going to mark up a pin there, and then add the base right sides down, also matching the center. So you'll see that the base is not as long as the main panel, but that's okay. As long as you match your centers, you'll be well on track. Okay, so I'm just going to clip this into place. Now, next thing we need to do before we start sewing, we need to mark on here 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter away from the end of the base panel, and this is where we're going to start and stop sewing. So we're going to leave a bit of the, oh, I think my pen has run out actually. I think that's maybe why I can't see it, is that it's run out. So we're going to leave 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter at each end unsewn. I'm actually just going to add a pin in there as well so that you can see it a little bit easier as well. And we're going to leave that unsewn at both ends. Do the second end there as well and add a pin. And we're going to sew this on our regular stitch length at our regular seam allowance of 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter. Okay. So we're going to start 3/8 inch away from the end. We're going to back stitch, sew along to the second marking 3/8 inch away and back stitch. So we're just going to sew one line, back stitch at the start and the end, but we're going to leave 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter unsewn at each end. Okay. So we're using our regular seam allowance. Right, let's have a look at that, check that it's okay. Yep, that looks great, and we should have a nice 3/8 inch unsewn at either end. Okay, grab your second main panel. Make sure that you can find the centre on there as well. And then we're going to add our base to this main panel as well. So make sure these are right sides down. You've got your main panel, your base, and your other main panel. So your base will be attached to both main panels along one edge each side. Okay, so we're going to do exactly the same on this one. So I'm just clipping it into place, and then we'll mark where to start and stop sewing. So we're going to leave 3/8 of an inch unsewn at each end. And I'll add a pin as well to make it a little bit easier to see. Same on this one. I think I might need a bigger desk if I'm sewing big projects like this. I wonder how I can justify that. Okay. At least I haven't dropped it off the end of the table this time though. Right, okay. So, going to start sewing again, same as we did before. So we're going to start sewing at that 3/8 of an inch mark, and we're using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's 1 centimetre and 1 centimetre. Right, okay, so that should be the same on both sides. Nice, yep. Okay, great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull these panels together. Doesn't matter how your handles are at the moment, just leave them to floop around however you like. But we're going to match up these short ends of the main panels. Okay. And we're just going to match them up as best you can. If you're cutting out it's a bit wonky, don't worry too much. Just match them however best. And we'll clip the other side, seeing as we're here. I apologise if you can hear some creaking. My stool is a bit creaky that I'm sitting on. I didn't realise quite how creaky it was. Okay. We'll just clip this. Now we're going to sew both of these side seams using our regular stitch length and our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. And the same on the other side. Okay. Now if you want to press these seam allowances open, you can. I'm not going to because my textured faux leather. But when you sit this with the base on the bottom, you'll be able to see it naturally wants to fall into this shape of your tidy tote, this basket shape, which is great. Okay, now before we sew these boxed corners, because at the moment you've got some rather unfortunate holes in the bottom of your bag. First thing, flatten the box out of your corner. Now do you remember we marked the centre on the end of your base as well? I'm just going to match that to my seam and pop a clip in it. And then we know that everything is all nice and even. Okay. And then I'm going to add another couple of clips just along this boxed corner, one either side, and you'll notice you've got a bit of an odd bunching in the corner. So what we're going to do is we're just going to snip into the seam allowance of the main panel right about where that stitching ends. Okay, and that should help it to sit flat. Don't know if you can see that on the video. I've got a little snip into the corner there, and that helps that sit nice and flat. I'm just going to add a clip. So I'll do the same on this other side. Just want to make sure that your base is out of the way before you do that snip. There we go. Hasn't got to be a big snip, just a little snip to help it bend around the corner. Okay, so that's one box corner. Let's sew this and then we'll come back and do it again, just so that it's fresh in our minds. So when you sew this, all I'm going to do is I'm literally just going to flatten this down so that I can fit it under my presser foot. And I'm sewing using my 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, same as before, and the regular stitch length. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Just as I come to this seam, just to note, I have opened out my seam allowances where I'm sewing over. Okay, so once that's sewn, just have a little look inside and make sure you haven't got any holes in the bottom corners. No, that's great to me. Okay, there's not really an area of stress in this bag, these bottom corners, because majority of the stress will be in this center where the handles are. But it's worth checking you haven't got any holes anyway. Now I'm actually going to cut my little snips before I flatten my box this time. You can do it either way, it really doesn't matter. Okay, so I will match my seam allowance to the center of the short end of the base. And then just flatten this out again as we did. And flatten this out, just make sure the edges are all nicely lined up. And we're going to sew it the same as we did before, with our regular stitch length, regular seam allowance, back stitching at the start and the end. Right, so just pop your finger in and double check those bottom corners. Yeah, all good. Right, that looks great. I'm really excited about getting this bag finished. That's fine. Okay, so next thing we want to do is turn the exterior right sides out. And then we can pop this to one side and sew our lining. I'll just turn this right sides out. My Decaville is in danger of coming detached, so I'm just being very, very careful with that. Once the lining's in and it's sandwiched between the two layers, it should be okay. If you are not using such a delicate faux leather, then you will obviously have secured yours properly with plenty of heat and steam, and it will now be perfectly attached to your base. But I didn't, because I was a bit scared of my faux leather. Right, so that's how we're looking at the moment. We can pop this to one side and move on to our lining next. If you'd like to add a mesh pocket to any of your bags, then I'm going to show you how to work out the length of your elastic that you need. You can use regular elastic and create a hem at the top to create a channel, or you can use this fold over elastic to attach to the top of your mesh, and that will pull your pockets in and also make them stretchy, but it'll also finish the top of the mesh as well. So measurement wise, what I've done is I've cut a piece of mesh unstretched, so this mesh does stretch in a widthwise direction, as you can see. I've cut it unstretched to be the same length as my main panel, approximately ish, wonky cutting aside. And then I've cut a piece of elastic that is 3/4 the length of my mesh. Okay, so in this instance, I've cut my mesh to be 6 inches high. My panel is actually 10 inches high, but I've cut mine to be 6 inches high because that's really just the height that I wanted my pocket to be. You could go as high as you like, or you could go as low as you like. Make sure that you don't go too low so that your pocket is still usable. But I've gone for 6 inches because that will suit what I want to put in these pockets. I've cut it the same width or the same length as my main panel piece. This is my lining. You can do it on the exterior of your bag if you want. I'm going to do mine on my lining. And then the elastic I've done at 3/4 of the length. So it's only actually 75% of the length of my mesh pocket. Okay, if you want a slightly tighter top to your mesh pockets, then feel free to adjust that, but I just find 75% is a good sort of amount. Right, the first thing we want to do, you can pop your main panel aside. I'll show you how to add this pocket into your bag, and you can add it to any bag that you like then. First thing we're going to do is mark the center of the mesh, and I'm going to do that using a pin. Now, it's hard to pin through mesh because there isn't much to pin onto, as you can imagine. So just do it as best you can through whatever you can. And then I'm also going to mark 3/4 and 1/4. So I'm going to mark the quarter marks as well. So I should have 3 pins in here at each quarter and at the center. And the other side as well. This just helps us make sure that our elastic is nice and even. Okay, so I've got 3 pins here. One is at 1/4, one is at 1/2, and one is at 3/4. Okay, and that will do, I would do that regardless of the size of your pocket. So mark 1/4, 1/2, and 3/4. I'll pop a clip in there just so you can see them on the video a little bit easier. There's not much to see with a mesh really, is there? Okay, now we're also going to do the same on our elastic. So we're going to mark 1/2. Again, I use pins because they're a little bit smaller, be a bit more precise. And then also 1/4 and 3/4. So all I'm doing is folding the end into the halfway mark, and that'll give us the 1/4. Now the fold over elastic has got 2 different sides. You've got a shiny side and a matte side. I don't actually think it matters which side you apply as your right side and your wrong side. They both tend to fold fairly similarly. There's probably a way you're supposed to do it, but I'm not very good at following rules, so I just tend to do it however I fancy. Okay, now to attach this elastic to this mesh, we're going to match up our marks. So first things first, I am going to match my center to my center. I'm going to take the pin out so I don't cause myself any mischiefs. And we're just going to pin the elastic on to the mesh. I've gone through that a couple of times because there's, oh, and I still haven't caught the mesh. Oh dear, that's not a very good start, is it? Top tip, take your time making sure that it's attached. Alternatively, you could glue this, that would also work. All right, let's get the center mark again. Right, there's the centre. Let's try again, shall we? Okay. So in theory, I'm going to fold this over the top of the mesh This time I'll double check that I've actually got the mesh enclosed in the fold over elastic before I put it down, which would be a good idea. Let's double check. Yes, the mesh is actually enclosed in the fold over elastic this time. That's probably what you should be aiming for. Okay, right, so let's next match up these other marks. So just pull the elastic so that the two marks meet up. Make sure that the top edge of the mesh is right in the center of that fold of the fold over elastic. And I'll double check that I've actually got it enclosed. Yeah. Okay, so you see we've got this extra bit of mesh hanging around there. Don't panic, we'll catch that afterwards. Right, I feel like I must have a few extra pins floating around, so let me put those in my pin pot before we go too much further. Okay, oh, okay, I'm attached to my mesh and my elastic. There's an extra pin there. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is attach this final mark together. So do it from this side, might be a little bit easier. So make sure that your mesh is nicely lined up to the center of the fold over elastic, and then fold it over. I've put my pin in the wrong way round just to be extra helpful. Turn that round, take it out and add it again. Okay, double check my mesh is in there. Yeah, great. Okay, now when we start sewing, we're going to manually move this end of the elastic to meet the end of the mesh, and you can pin that if you would like to. If you feel more comfortable, you can pin that at the start. As we sew, we're just going to be stretching the fold over elastic so that it meets the mesh. Try not to stretch it too much because you don't want to stretch your mesh out, but just a nice gentle stretch. Okay, so we're going to do a few stitches at the start. I'm going to back stitch. If you've got a stretch stitch on your machine, then I would recommend using it. If not, straight stitch has always worked okay for me. It just means that your pocket won't stretch quite so far. Now as you're sewing, you're going to just gently stretch it, and you can see the gap inside your fold over elastic, and you just want to make sure that your mesh is encouraged inside that gap as you're sewing, just so that you can ensure that your mesh is fully enclosed. Okay, it's a little bit easier to do when you're actually sewing, surprisingly. So I'm sewing as close to the edge of the open edge of the fold over elastic as I can get, and I'm going to use my regular stitch length, which for me is about 2.5. So to start off with, I want to make sure that this edge of this mesh is nicely enclosed. So I'm going to do just 3 stitches and back stitch, and then I'm going to take out my first pin. Now I'm going to stretch my fold over elastic however I need to be able to get the rest of that mesh inside the elastic just on this first little section. I've got a little end that's being a bit awkward. There we go. Okay, so stretch it however you need to just to get that bit of mesh in. So stretch your elastic until the mesh is sitting straight. Okay, so don't worry about the rest of the pocket, just sew up to this first quarter mark. Okay, and at this point you can start stretching your fold over elastic to get the rest of this mesh in if you like. Make sure that all these little bits are tucked in. There we go, and then carry on sewing. Okay, so just keep going. Just gently stretching the elastic so that your mesh sits nice and flat. Okay, so we're nearly up to the center mark. So now I'm going to take my pin out of my center mark, make sure that my mesh is nicely tucked into my elastic. Okay, I'm coming up to my final point now. So I'm actually going to add another pin into the end of my elastic, just to make sure that the end of my elastic matches the end of my mesh. And then I can take out this final 3/4 mark pin and make sure that that mesh, the edge of the mesh, is nice and tucked into the center of that elastic. Okay, and as you approach the end, just take out that last pin. And back stitch a couple of stitches at the end. Now it doesn't matter if your stitching is not hugely neat, because as you can see, it's going to gather up slightly anyway. Okay, now to add it onto your panel, you'll need to find the center of your lining main panel. I'm going to mark that with a pencil. And then you need to find the center of your mesh, or your mesh pocket, and make sure that that matches. Now it might start to bow in slightly or pull your lining panel in. That's okay, as long as you make sure that it's nice and flat just where you're sewing. Doesn't matter. Okay, so making sure that I'm not stretching my mesh at all along this bottom seam. Just adding clips to keep it nice and straight. We're going to do along the bottom seam first, and then we'll worry about the sides. So don't worry too much about how your pocket looks at the minute. As long as it's nice and flat along this bottom edge, then that's great. Nice and not stretched. There we go. Okay, so you can see that the top is obviously you know, smaller than the bottom. So what I'm going to do, I'll start on this side because this side seems to match a little bit better. Just going to gently encourage the mesh over to the side so that the edge of the mesh pocket matches the edge of your lining panel, and I'm going to clip it at the top, and that means that no matter what's going on over here, this bit is nice and straight and even. Okay, I'll add another clip just to hold that in place there. Okay, then I'm going to pull this second side out, and my mesh is slightly longer, and that's okay. All I'm going to do is just flatten this mesh out, flatten this pocket out so it's nice and straight, and add a clip. And my mesh pocket is slightly longer, so I'm just going to make sure that it matches up and it's nice and flat like that. And I have got a bit of extra mesh, and that's fine, I can cut that off afterwards. So first thing I'm going to do is sew around the outside. So I'm going to start at the top here, and I am going to add maybe 3 or 4 back stitches here to make sure that's really secure. I'm going to sew to the corner, sew along the bottom, and sew up again to the second side. Now don't panic too much about what's going on in the middle here at the moment. Just make sure that these edges are nice and flat. I'm going to sew using my regular stitch length and slightly smaller than my seam allowance on my pattern. So if my pattern is 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre, then I'm going to be sewing at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now usually a basting stitch I would make longer, but on this situation, because the mesh is quite holey, I want to make sure that it's secured nice and properly. Right, so that's also going to be secured into your side seams and your bottom seam as well, but we're just making sure that it's nice and secure for now during construction. Okay, so flatten this out as best you can, and all we're going to do is divide this up however you want. So if you're making a quite a big panel like this, you can decide what divisions you want. If you're making a small panel, maybe you won't divide it. But to divide it, all you do is you just flatten out that section, make sure the mesh is nice and straight, nice and flat, and just add a couple of pins in just to hold that straight how you need it. Now I'm following a pattern for this one, obviously, so I'm going to double check what divisions I need to do. 5 inches, 12.5 centimeters either way. So I think what I'll do is I'll sew up the center first, and then I know that that bit is nice and secure. So I'm going to sew from the bottom to the top. I'm going to back stitch at the top, and then I'm going to pivot and sew back down the panel. So I'm going to start with my needle down. So all we're doing when we're sewing along is just keeping both the mesh pocket and the lining panel flat. Now I've done about 3 or 4 back stitches there, gone over that a few times just to make sure that that's nice and secure. I would do that on fabric, I wouldn't do that on faux leather because you don't want too many holes puncturing it. But on fabric, just a few extra to secure it. So now I'm going to sew back down the same line that I sewed before. And that pocket is not going anywhere. Okay, so this pattern calls for divisions at 5 inches either side as well. So that's 12.5 centimeters. So all I'm going to do is add a pin in there, and then just make sure this is nice and flat again, and I'll add a pin in the top. Don't worry too much about what's going on elsewhere, just as long as that bit where you're going to be sewing is flat. And then might as well measure for this side as well while we're here. Just going to turn this around, it'll be a little bit easier for me to do. Oh gosh, my stitching matches the fabric so well, it's a bit tough to see. Right, okay, so I've found where I'm going to divide, putting a pin in there. And also in the top, so I'm just flattening out that mesh just so that it's not distorted at all. And add a pin in here as well. Okay, if you want to, you can draw lines, but I find that any wobbliness kind of is disguised in the pockets, so you don't really need to panic too much. So same again, we're starting at the bottom, sew to the top, back stitch, you know, a good number of times, however many your times you're comfortable with, 3, 4, 5 times, and then pivot and sew back down again to the bottom. Okay, so that's one division done. So I've got 3 pockets now so far. Let's do my final one. Okay, and just manipulate your fabric how you need to make sure that the mesh is sitting nice and flat. There we go. Okay, so you can take your pins out. So that's your panel with your mesh pockets ready, and you can construct your lining exactly the same as you would any other pattern. Obviously, if you're following the Tidy Tote pattern, which this panel is from, then you would sew your second panel and then you would attach it into your exterior. Okay, so that's how to sew, add mesh pockets into any lining panel, and how to do the measurements as well. Right, so at this point you should have your mesh pockets attached to your lining panels. I've done both of mine. They're both done in exactly the same way. Okay, so if you've only done one of them, pause me now and go and do the second one. Then we're going to attach these panels to the base in the same way that we did for the exterior. Don't worry about the fact that these are pulling in at all. They will straighten out once we get them all attached together, so don't panic. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is get our base, our lining base. So we're just working exactly the same as we did for the exterior. Nothing majorly different at all. So I'm marking the centre of my base on both sides. And again, actually, let's mark the centre of the short ends as well. Let's do the other end as well. Okay, right, then we are going to line up the centre of our lining main panel. Let me just fold this in half and check that I've got the centre in the right place, more or less. Okay. I think I've just turned that all the way around to end up with it exactly the same place it started. Right, so match up your centres like we did on the exterior. Now remember, we're going to finish, or start and finish rather, 3/8 of an inch from the end. So I'll mark those before I finish clipping it into place, and then it'll be a little bit easier. Okay. Right, so just flatten this out all along the bottom to get it clipped into place. Just smooth it out inside. Don't worry about the puckered up mesh inside. As long as it's flat where we're going to be sewing, that's all that we really need to worry about at this point. Okay, one more. Right, so we're going to sew along between the two marks there. So we're going to leave a gap 3/8 of an inch before and 3/8 of an inch after. That's 1 centimetre either side. We're going to sew with our regular stitch length and our regular seam allowance. I'm saying regular seam allowance. Let me just double check. Yes, we are. Great. Okay. So on this panel, we're going to start sewing. We're going to leave a turning gap in the bottom, a fairly sizable turning gap. So I'm going to start sewing. So I've back stitched. I'm going to sew to about there. Back stitch again. So I've just sewn for a couple of inches. Increasing my stitch length to my longest stitch. Keep going. And then decrease back down to my regular stitch length and do a bit of back stitching. And then sew to this other mark and back stitch. Okay, so we've got here a turning gap that I've basted across. So that turning gap, let's see what length I've done that. I've managed to get 8.5 inches. You might be able to get slightly more if you're a bit more brave than me. I'm just going to finger press that back out of the way. That's going to be our turning gap there for the whole bag. Okay, so now we need our second lining panel. I'm going to do exactly the same again. So you've got your lining panel, pocket attached, and base, sorry, and then second lining panel with pockets attached. So let's line up the center again as we did before. Oh, don't forget my mark where to start and stop sewing. That's the one thing I keep forgetting, or nearly forgetting. Mark those in now, and then we know we've got them. Right. Let's add a couple of clips in here. Now this side, we don't have to leave a turning gap. We can just sew all the way along. Okay, so remember, don't worry about any puckers or any mishmash of the lining. As long as this bit along the seam line is flat under the foot, we're all right. We're doing what we need to be doing. Okay, so start at that first mark, 3/8 of an inch in, 1 centimetre in, back stitch, and we're going to sew all the way along to the second mark. Okay, so same as for the exterior, we should have 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre at the end of each part there open. Okay, so now we're going to bring our lining main panels together, and I think on this bit it's more important that your elastic matches on the side than your top and bottom match, because you want it to look neat and evenly matched inside when you look inside. So you can see here mine is not quite the same at the top there, but I've matched my elastic over my fabric because I think that's more important on this one. When you look inside, you don't want to see your elastic at different levels. You'd rather see that at the same level. Okay, so I'll clip that one first. So I'm clipping exactly, matching the elastic and clipping that, and then I can go back and clip the other side, or the rest of it, either side of that elastic. Okay, so this might bunch slightly again, don't worry too much, as long as it's flat under the presser foot where we want to sew, then it'll all be good. Okay, so we're using the same regular seam allowance, regular stitch length, and back stitching at the start and the end. Now as you're sewing this, you might find that it wants to bunch up a little bit from the mesh, so just flatten it down. Okay, and we'll do the second side. I think I'm going to start from the bottom like I did the other side, and then at least they're both even. Okay, right, great. So again, as before, if you want to press open these seam allowances, then that will give you a much neater finish. I'm not going to, because I'm trying to get this done just for the video, but if I was making one for myself, I would maybe consider getting the iron out. Unfortunately, I haven't brought my iron up into the filming room today. So I'm just going to finger press it open, and I can always go back and press it later on once it's constructed if it's not sitting nice and neat. Okay, that actually looks pretty good finger pressed. So now remember, the same as we did before, we're going to cut little snip into the seam allowance of the lining main panels just past the point of stitching on all 4 of these corners. And then we can flatten out these box corners, can't we? Right, so we're going to flatten this out and match the seam, the centre of the seam, to the centre point of our lining base. Yeah, that's great. So it's nice there with that little snip, and the same the other side as well. Okay. So that's one side ready. We'll do the second side. So I'm matching the centre of the seam to the centre mark on this lining base. And the other side as well. Okay. That looks nice and flat as well. It's great. It sits a lot neater than the exterior does, because this is just cotton, which is good. So all we're going to do is stitch across these corners, same as we did for the exterior. So using the same stitch length, same seam allowance, back stitch at the start and the end. Now on this one, I am going to back stitch where I go over the seam, just because it's going to have a little bit more stress on it than the exterior will. Okay, and we'll do the second side as well. Okay, just pop your hand in, double check that that's all good, there's no holes in the corners. That feels pretty good to me, and this will give you a real good idea of what your lining is going to look like as well. That looks pretty good to me. Actually looks a bit under the sea, mine does, doesn't it? Right, okay, so now we need our exterior back, so go and grab your exterior and then we'll be able to sew the two together. Right, we're nearly finished now. We've got our exterior fully constructed and our lining fully constructed, and all we need to do is put the two together. Now, this will be a tight squeeze, okay? But to avoid having to turn your exterior more times than necessary, it's easier to have your exterior right sides out and your lining wrong sides out and pop your exterior inside your lining. However, that does make it a really tight fit. So we're going to see if I can manage this with this faux leather, because this faux leather is quite a bit stiffer than the others I've used, but we'll see. So what we're hoping to achieve here is seam allowances open where they meet at the top and match the side seam allowance. That seems to be fitting okay. And the second side seam allowance. And then we're going to match the centres. Do you remember we marked those earlier? The centres at the top of the exterior and the lining. So squash this in. Give it a good nice squash down. Okay, so I've matched all those 4 points of the centres. Now all we need to do is just ease these out so they match together all the way round. And they should do, although they do feel like they won't until you actually get them matched up along that seam line on the top. So don't panic too much, just work your way round, all the way round, just making sure that they're nice and even. So I'm just going to clip all the way around the top. In fact, before I do this, actually, I'm going to stop and put a label, one of my labels in. I hope you don't mind this brief interruption. Got to find the labels first, because instead of putting them away neatly, I chucked them into my sewing box. But this is too good an opportunity to miss, because I'm making this for somebody else. So just going to pop a label into the top seam there, I think. Let me just pop that in and add an extra clip to hold it in place. I had intended to put it in earlier, of course, but I forgot. So better late than never. Hopefully it won't look too forgotten about. Okay, right, so this last section, ease around and clip it into place. Okay, next thing we're going to do, we're going to pop this under the machine foot. Now, I haven't got a free arm, I've got a flatbed machine. So I'm going to be sewing inside my bag. So I'm going to be popping it under the presser foot like this, so that my presser foot will be inside, and I'm going to sew around the entire top with it like that. Right, so I'm just going to start anywhere, it doesn't really matter where I start. Obviously my walking foot is quite long, so wherever I start, I need to make sure that it is not resting on a clip. I'm going to start with my needle down, because it means I can manoeuvre the bag without losing my stitch line then. So I'm using my regular stitch length and my regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, or 1 centimetre. I'm basically just sewing around the entire top of the bag now. Right, so once you go around the top, just have a little look and double check that nothing has slipped. Can't see any bits veering off or wobbling around anywhere. You still should have these extra bits of webbing poking out the top. That's great. When we turn it through and do the final top stitch, they will also be caught in the top stitch. So they'll be caught 3 times in total. Right. Next thing we need to do is unpick our basting stitches from our turning gap. Do you remember we left a turning gap here in the bottom of one of our lining panels? So just unpick those basting stitches and that will give you a nice line to follow when you're closing this turning gap. Unfortunately, if you want a really neat finish on this one, you are going to have to hand stitch. However, you could choose to machine stitch. You just need to change the construction slightly, and I'll talk you through that. I'm just unpicking these stitches all the way along. I'm quite looking forward to turning it right sides out and seeing it all put together. You get a good idea of it, don't you, while you're going, but nothing beats that first look, I think. Right, okay, so now I've got my hole, my turning gap hole, and we're just going to pull the exterior through nice and gently, or as gently as you can. It's a fairly sizable bag to turn through, isn't it? But if you can be as gentle as possible, then you minimize any risk of tearing. Okay, right, great. Okay, so all I'm doing is just making sure that this lining is pushed down nice and neat inside. Added my label there, few, that was fine. It's going to have a few stitches through it, but that's okay. I remembered it at least. Now, to make sure that this lining is a really nice tight fit, you can see it looks a little bit baggy at the moment. When you're pulling things in and out, you risk this coming up and being messy again. What we're going to do is hand sew the seam allowances together of these boxed corners. Okay, so reaching through your bag, I'll pull mine out slightly so I can show you. So reaching through your bag, oh, my bag base has come detached again. Might have to give that a bit more of a press. This is why I should not use fancy textured faux leather for something like this. Right, so I've got my seam allowance here for my boxed bottom of my exterior, and then here is the seam allowance for my lining, and we are going to stitch these two together. So match the center seams. You can either hand stitch these or you can machine stitch these. If you want to close your turning gap by machine, don't do this step, okay, because it will be really awkward for you later. Might not be able to get it under the foot. So you've got your box bottom from your exterior and your box bottom from your lining, and the seam allowances are clipped together. Now we're just going to do a few stitches along the seam allowances. We're not going to go past the stitching that we already did to secure these two together. Okay, now if you can fit it under your presser foot, you can do this on your machine, or you can just add a few hand stitches. So I'm just sewing at 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Make sure they're all lined up together on the edges. Don't think I'll be able to get all the way to the end. Okay, so that's one side. And you can push that back out then. Now you should find that as you're pushing your exterior out, your lining is also going with it. And this edge of the lining in the base, turn it around so you can see, is now really, really sharp into the corner. Really nice and neat. So we're going to do the same for the other boxed corner. So we'll pull that out. This second one is not quite as easy as the first one, unfortunately, because you've already got that first one done. So there's my boxed corner from the exterior. Let's see if I can pull my lining box corner. Oh, hang on, I'm not sure if I will be able to. Yes, yes, no, yes, yes. Okay, so you should have seam allowances together and matching those, so you know that those are centered at least. And it doesn't matter how far along this seam allowance you manage to sew, just sew as much as you can. Oh dear, that didn't like that. That pulled out. As much as you can do will just give it a really nice, neat finish inside. Okay. Now, I don't think I'm going to be able to get that through my sewing machine because that's a little bit tighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand sew these. Just pull a bit of thread off my machine. Doesn't have to be particularly neat, it's not going to be seen. It's literally just to hold the lining right in place there. Oh, hang on, I've got a bit too much thread now. Let me double it over. This is why I don't generally do hand stitching. I'm not very good at it. Can't even get the right amount of thread. And look at that, my needle is quite bent as well. And if you are a hand sewer, you're probably watching this thinking, oh gosh, what's she doing? Yours might be an absolute work of art inside, and I hope it is. Mine is definitely not. Okay, so all I'm going to do is just a few little stitches as far along here as I can, just to attach these two seam allowances together. Literally just going over the edge of the seam allowances, just to secure them into place. You can use this on any bag really. If you can get to the seam allowances, the corresponding seam allowances for whichever bag you're making, and you can sew them together, then you will find that you have a much better looking fitted lining. So sometimes it's not that your lining's too big, sometimes your lining might fit perfectly, but without the seam allowances sewn together, it's not sitting right into the corners, so it looks like it's a poorly fitting lining. So if you've got another, well, any bag that you're making really, you could do this on, curved bag or a bag with box corners like this. If you can get to the corners, the seam allowances, then you can do this. All right, so I'm just going along. You can see these stitches are not very neat, and that's okay, it doesn't matter. As long as they are there, that's all that matters. Just do a stitch to secure. Okay. Right, okay, so now we can push that. There's my clips that I lost. We can push this exterior boxed corner out. Just trying to do it so you'll be able to see it, but I don't think I can. So as we're pushing this exterior box corner out, you'll find that the lining box corner also magically falls into perfect place inside. Right, my base stabilizer has gone a little bit awry, unstuck as we said. So I'm just smoothing that down. Now you can see inside the base, the lining base is so nicely fitting now, isn't it? Really, really well. Okay. Right, let's see what order I do these in. I think that okay, so we need to close the turning gap. Can I do that on my machine? Let's see. I need to turn the bag fairly inside out because I've just sewn my seam allowances together, haven't I? Let's see if I can do. Now, I talked to you earlier about how to minimize creases on your exterior fabric, and here I am creasing up my exterior fabric again, so that's very good. Right, I think I might actually be able to get this through my machine. Now, you know, as much as I love a perfect finish, there is no denying that I will always, always, always take the machine stitch over the hand stitch if I can. So I'm going to try and fit it through the machine. If you're watching this for the second time and I wasn't able to manage it, then feel free to say, told you so. But I'm going to give it a go. So all I'm doing is just clipping this turning gap closed. I'm folding it along those original holes where we took out the basting stitches. And then I'm going to see if I can pop this under my presser foot and sew with a really close seam allowance. So I'm doing a scant 1/8 of an inch, so that's about 2 mil if you can. Okay, so check I haven't missed any bits or got any holes. No, that worked pretty well. Okay, excellent. We'll pretend that I knew that and I didn't really hand stitch all the others because I thought that wouldn't work. Okay, so now we're going to push this back into place, and the only thing left to do, apart from ironing my base back into place, my base stabilizer back into place, is the final top stitch. So I am going to start at the edges where I've got the seam allowances, and I know I've got them open because I opened them up before I sewed them. I'm just folding this over along the line so that the lining is tucked in. Now when you get to the handles, you'll be able to feel that you've got that bit of webbing inside still on the inside of the seam from where we turned it over. And we had that little overlap. I'm adding a few extra clips because I just want to make sure that this doesn't go wonky, because I suspect that it'll be quite visible on this faux leather. Okay, and where I've got my label in here, I'm just going to tuck my label down inside before I do this final top stitching. And this is the last thing done, and then you can go and load up your Tidy Tote and feel nice and tidy. I think I could find about 1 million uses for these. And I might have to make 1 million just to prove that I can think of 1 million uses. Right, there we go. Okay, so just double check that everything's still fitting how it should before you do this final top stitch. It looks pretty good to me. Where should we start? Start not right by my label, I think. Now let me think. I've got blue in my machine. I might just change this over for a charcoal. on my exterior fabric. So I'm just going to change my thread colour and then I'll come back and we'll do the final top stitch. Right, I've changed my thread over. I've also turned it inside out so that I'll be stitching on the exterior, because remember I haven't got a thingy free arm, so I want to be stitching with my foot inside the bag. So I've turned it inside out so that I'm stitching on the exterior fabric. Now I'm going to increase my stitch length. So I've gone from a 2.5 to a 3.5. I'm going to start with my needle down so that I know if I need to stop and readjust that my stitch line is not going to go wonky. I've just noticed where my elastics meet, and that looks pretty neat. I'm glad we spent the extra time matching that up. Right, so I'm just going to sew really slowly all the way around the top back to where I started. Right. Oh, I forgot to check that my label was pointing down at the right time. Phew. Luckily it was. Okay, let's get rid of these last threads. I'm glad I changed my thread colour on the exterior actually, because the charcoal looks much better. And if I'd gone a bit wobbly, well, I might have gone a bit wobbly. We would never know though, because it's very well hidden on the charcoal. That's good. Right. Push this through. Make sure it's everything is where it should be. And as we push out these box corners on the exterior, the lining will also follow if you sew the seam allowances together like I did. Right, that looks fine. All of those pockets work as they should. That's lucky. Brilliant. I quite like that. Now, what you may wish to do is leave these four corners clipped overnight or for a couple of nights, just to train them into this more boxy basket shape. If you prefer it more of a rounded end, then you don't need to worry, but if you'd prefer it more of a boxy kind of shape, then you might want to just leave it trained. You could always put a stitch into each corner as well, if you want to make sure that they stay that same way. We've got a pocket right in that corner. There we go. Right, so that is our tidy tote. I think that looks great. I cannot wait to fill this up. This one I'm going to use, well, I'm actually going to give this one as a gift, filled with nappies and creams and lots of lovely baby gifts. I've got my one which I use for sewing supplies, and I've also got one that I'm sending off to a friend who has got her own business and lots of administrative bits and pieces. I think that over the next few hours, this, as it's sitting, will lose these creases. Obviously I couldn't press it because of the faux leather, but if you've got a fabric or faux leather that you can press, then yours will be looking a bit less creased than mine. So that is our tidy tote. You can leave these clipped for as long as you like, or you can add a stitch into each corner. I have really enjoyed making this one, and I absolutely love this pattern. I hope you love it too, and I hope you have sewn along with me. I can't wait to see what you make. Please do tag me and show me what you've made from this pattern. Thanks for joining me.